How's it going, YouTube? Convention today with another video, and today, guys, the brain is going to be the new meta tier list for the format. This is really important to talk about, though, because of the fact that we have such a change in how end boards work. We also have one of the best bans that I've seen in a very long time with the Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity. So Centurion does move on to Rogue, which is fantastic. I think that Calamity was just one of those cards that should have been hit back in Punkturian days at YCS Hartford, but at the same time, it was a card that just had to go. If the Zexal is banned, Calamity should have also been banned, especially because Centurion can put up the trap, so even if you have the droplet, you need to be able to send a trap, which most people won't have. So it's just a really toxic scenario that sometimes you just lose to. Now I think that the deck is a lot more interesting, being able to summon out the Blazar and build a board rather than just being like, hey, I guess you lose, right? So seeing Crimson Dragon being used for something that isn't just a complete lockout, definitely a lot better in my eyes. But we will move on from Centurion into Branded. Branded will be around tier 2. I think this is where it usually just stays anyway, though. Sanctifier didn't get hit. Branded Fusion went to 1. The deck is still fine, though. It's really consistent as it is. I do think that Sanctifier should have been banned because, Puppet Lock. But there is a lot of Bestials in the format right now, and something that we'll just go ahead and do now is talk about the best deck, if not the second best deck, or just tied for first, honestly, right now, which is Yubel. So, with the amount of Bestials in the format right now to be able to just counter Yubel, Branded does catch a stray from that because you're already playing so many cards to go ahead and stop a deck that's in a similar stature. So with that regard, I would say that Branded is just hard stuck in 2, whereas a deck like Yubel will just be in 1. Also with Snake Eye, I wanted to talk about even like Rescue. So Snake Eye and Rescue are going to be very similar because a lot of people are playing Rescue again, but Rescue's more 1.5, and when I talk about a tier 1 Snake Eye, I'm talking about Fire King, because the Fire King board used to end on an Amblow Whale, right? Like, it didn't even end on the Oppo most of the time, and you would make the Oppo off the IP on your opponent's turn. So the end board for the Fire King cards relatively doesn't change a whole lot. The deck is still extremely strong. Now there's a lot of consistency hits, especially if you hard open Poplar, but you also don't play like the Diabell Star, the main deck one that's like the bigger Poplar. So I do think that it's really interesting the way that the deck kind of changes, and if a lot of people are switching over to playing the Fire King cards, that means Droll is really good, which keeps things like Drytron check, which won't end up being a very good deck. I think it'll be okay, but with the amount of Droll expected, the amount of Bestials, another deck that catches heavy strays right now will be Drytron. But I do think that it has potential to be a very low-end tier 2. Grass just came back, and a lot of people are like, well, it's a one-of, it isn't searchable. Well, there is left arm off thrust, and then there is grass off thrust as well. And then some people are even going as far as playing a deck that I would consider rogue now, which will end up being the Thunder Dragon strategy, which is really cool because there's 2 Colossus now, and the deck can kind of function a little better, so you can play like Dragon Thunder. And if you are playing a Pio with Thunder cards, and then you have something like Left Arm, banishing your hand when you have Thunder cards in your hand is pretty strong. So definitely very cool, and I'm very interested to see what a deck like this will do. And this will just be in the rogue category, but I do think Drytron has potential. 3 Orange Light, we have Eva now. I do think that the evolution of Drytron has been really interesting. Me personally, I think that it's just one of the worst things to play against. They put up the Amor factor, your turn gets skipped, it's not very fun or interactive to play against. But there are a lot of counters in the format right now, so hopefully that's enough, but we'll have to wait and see. As far as Melodious goes, it'll be somewhere in tier 2. I think the deck is still solid. It's pretty cheap, too, if that's something that you want to pick up. So that's something to consider. I don't think that it's, like, super crazy, but it is pretty consistent for what it is. So if you want something that's just going to be reliable, I'd pick up Melodious. Chimera is definitely a very interesting deck. I think that the Fiendsmith cards with this deck are pretty strong, but I would just put it into the tier 2 category. The Lacrima ban is actually really interesting for this deck. It's not the be-all, end-all because you still have like Aerial Eater and whatnot, but at the same time, Would have been nice to have this still around because it gives you another way to play around things like Nibiru, and the end board started including Appaloosa, so it did get hurt from the extra deck hits for sure, but it's still not like a bad option. I'm never a huge fan of Chimera because once it's telegraphed, it's really easy to beat. So it's something that's like okay, but not something that I would just go for openly. The other thing here is going to be White Forest. So White Forest, like their runic variant or even like the toy box variant, they're both pretty strong. Their runic variant is a bit better than the toy box variant though. This format we're going into is going to be pretty open, pretty diverse. I know a lot of people are like, well, Yubel is still the best deck, and then we're going to have Azamina. Azamina is going to change a lot. So we're talking about right now. But as of right now, I do think that there are several options that you can play and you'll do just fine. So I think that in the more openness of a format right now, the White Forest deck is very strong for what it is, especially the runic variant. So this is something where if you are very smart with the deck, where if you understand how the deck plays, this is a deck that could be a low end 1.5, a high end tier 2. I do think that White Forest is strong, but I don't think it's as strong as something like Rescue, and I don't think it's as strong as something like Yubel or Snake Eyes at the moment. So, the next one here is going to be Tearlament. Topper Rogue, easy Topper Rogue. That grass looks greener. The deck still performs and does what it needs to do, especially the small buff off the grass is really cool. I'm just going to be playing like a 43 card variant like I usually do and just siding grass. So when I go second, I can just rip grass off a thrust, right? So I think that's just better than playing like a 60 card variant, a 60 card pile. I think that's kind of silly. So that's just something where there is a lot of warrant to playing something like a pile, but I think if you play a smaller deck, and then either if you're playing like Drytron, you play a standard count and then you side thrust and you side the grass, it just makes the mills that you have more consistent. It's just a lot better. Another strong tier 2 is going to end up being the Kashtira deck. Not a whole lot to say here. It's a shifter deck. At the end of the day, it's going to do what it's going to do. It's still pretty consistent. It rewards players who do understand how to sequence that deck very well. As far as like Labyrinth goes, it's still going to be in tier 2. Deck is still exceedingly underwhelming. When it does really well with a good pilot, then it's insane. When it doesn't, it's not the greatest deck. You'll find a lot of decks in here that aren't going to be like fantastic, and they'll be hard stuck into tier 2. So you'll kind of see that as we go along. I think the best deck in tier 2 right now is definitely just Voiceless Voice. It's not bad. It has the least hits out of anything right now, and is doing pretty consistent, especially if Fiendsmith cards are getting reeled back a little bit. It's going to have a little bit more time to shine. The deck can play a lot of non-engine. I think this is the deck that could be a pretty safe pickup for right now. The one branded fusion doesn't really matter because even I prefer to play this deck without the branded cards. I don't think that they're like that good for the deck, right? So I think right now it's fine at like top of tier 2. Now, the next deck here that's going to be also up in like the tier 1 category, Protoss, Shifter, Ritual Beast cards. The deck can play through a lot. It can main deck board breakers. I can play quite a bit of non-engine, not like a lot, but a little bit. I think the deck itself is just pretty strong. Shout out to JoJo. But at the same time, you know, it is what it is. The deck performs. And if you can play the broken cards, you should play the broken cards, right? It's just how that works. So that is what it is. But so the next one here is going to be Runic Stun, somewhere in the middle of tier 2. It's just Runic Stun. We're not really going to have a conversation about that one. As far as the Musket deck, bottom of 1.5, strong deck still a good deck choice. Other decks outshine it right now, but it's still not a bad choice. Into the Brains is a pretty crazy card. Now, here's a deck that a lot of people probably want to hear about and understand where this is going to be put. So the next one here is going to be Tenpai. So this might surprise you, and you might call me crazy, but it's going to be top of tier 2 or bottom of tier 1.5. You can call me absolutely crazy, but I'm putting this in the top of tier 2. So for me, Sangan summoning and Prosperity hit, that's just brutal. And this deck really thrived off of being able to get to cards like Prosperity and just outing problematic things on the board. I am not as afraid of this deck as I used to be, especially after a double whammy hit like that. It was insane. If it was just Sangan or if it was just the Prosperity, then I was like, okay, that's fine. But the fact that it was both, that's pretty rough. And a lot of you are probably going to be like, listen, that deck is still very good. And it very well might be. But I think right now, that deck got hit into oblivion So we'll see. We'll see. It'll still be around, but I don't think it's going to be as popular as it was. A couple of decks that are just like don'ts right now. The Sword Soul deck, the Marincess deck, probably Dark World and Pearly. Pearly could probably be Rogue right now. I think none of these decks are particularly very strong or good at the moment. I think Pearly is always one of those things that you can run. You can. And if you set up full board, then sure, it's pretty good. But I do think that these other decks here, just really out of the realm of performance at the moment. So that's something that I probably stray away from. As far as Memento, though, it's probably up here above Whitewoods. But Memento Fiendsmith is just such a solid deck right now. It has Bone Party, which is like your 10E Dragon Circle to be able to dodge things. You have Newt, which is just a crazy card. You have full combo off things like Dark Blade. The deck just performs. It does very well for what it can do. Dragon is just going to be Rogue. Someone just won a regional with it, but it's still like very okay right now. And I love Dragon, but it's like, like it's fine, but not that good. We have the Plant deck in tier 2. Again, it's just one of those things where it's like if it goes off, sure, but it can't go second. So if you can't pair up to some of these boards right now, you're just going to have a really bad time playing that deck. And then Sprite is probably still going to be up in that 1.5 right now, just with the way that the ban list went. I think that that's another deck that can really pop off soon. And this is where I'm at right now. If you have differing opinions, definitely let me know down below in the comment section. I'm definitely interested to hear what you have to say. This is just where I'm at the moment, and I think that this is going to be a really interesting format that we go into, and we'll have to wait and see. Thanks, everyone.